Good morning. We have to present the film Arthur Rambo that competes in the official section of the 69th edition of the San Sebastian Film Festival. The following people, excuse me for my pronunciation of French. First of all, we have Laurent Contet, the director of the film. We have Samuel Du, Fanny Bordino, co-scriptwriters. We have Marin Luciani, producer, and we have Rabaranait Ofela, actor. If you want to ask any questions, please raise your hands as usual.
Whenever you are talking.
On peut l'enlever.
Okay. Vale.
Merci.
Hi. Congratulations, first of all, for the film. And my question is directed to Laurent and Rabat. I would like to ask you whether you believe that artists such as you in the post-truth society that we live in are a bit hand-tied and foot-tied because there's a fragility or a certain sort of level of fragility in what you do. And another thing, do you think that Twitter is the Nazism of the 21st century? No, I wanted to make this film, and the reason is because I was asking myself, what's the position or what's the place that social media has in our lives? And we look at those social media with very little attention, I think, to avoid excess use of them. Anything can be said on the social media, and all of the messages have the same level. You can be the president of the Republic of a country, or a young author, a talented young author at the end of the day. They select you according to the number of followers you have. But each word is equal between one person and another person. And each word is subject to simplification because you write short messages very quickly. And that simplification, I'm afraid of it, and that's what I've tried to convey in the film. Apart from that fact that simplification brings about a lot of violence, one is easier insulted in social media than what happens in real life. That violence that occurs is almost inherent to this media. Hola, buenos días de Brasil. Tengo un par.
The first question is, your cinema usually has, in the way to depict realism, to create realism, a sort of a blend between fiction and documentary. I would like to understand this documentary regard in a movie like that, especially how you deal with it at your editing process. The second question is a really small detail. There is a scene on the movie where we see on a poster the word Guy Debord. I would like to understand if it's a reference, explicit reference to Guy Debord in the idea of La Société des Spectacles. Thank you very much for the film.
Alors, on va commencer par la deuxième question qui est la plus...
Let's start with the second question, which is much easier to answer. She's the decorator, the director of the film decided she found that poster and she decided to put it up there. And I'm always afraid of significant elements on set. And I think it's great to have that poster there, and that's why I kept it. Because there is quite an exact relationship between Debord and the issues the film deals with. The other question, yes, fiction and documentary, yes, okay. what interests me quite often is seeing and showing the complexity of the world we live in. I spend a lot of time not so much documenting myself, but talking to the actors and actresses who I work with quite a lot, and with the people who are representative of the characters that I'm going to create. I think I'm very involved in everything I see that around me. I try to relocate it. I hope that the films are not just a clear way of displaying it, but the making of a film, I want it to convey emotions as well, because all of these social and political issues concern me when they are truly lived through a specific character who has difficulties to find himself feeling well. I would like to know, the feeling that Arthur Rimbaud's character leaves you is that basically he doesn't sustain, he's incoherent, and he's not prepared for success. What I would like to know, do you consider that he's a son of the digital era, or his character, does it transcend in time? I think he's a character who is quite representative of our time, a representative of a social fracture as well, a social gap or fracture which is quite marked and quite delimited, especially in Paris. The Parisian life, and obviously the banlieue, that is to say the surrounding neighborhoods. It's difficult for a young person who lives on the outskirts in the banlieue to find a place in the other world. He's a figure who is quite representative, as I say, of our current society. And as regards social media, that's what Karim says at a certain moment in the film. Even if they were brought up with social media, there's a lack of understanding of how they operate, the social media operate. And he says, well, okay, at the beginning, when I started to tweet, I did it just to have fun with 3 or 4 buddies who were on the media, on the social media. And we have to understand that when you're in a social media, potentially you're directing your messages to the whole world, and that whole world, that system has memory, a very powerful memory. And if you delete your messages, despite everything, they're still there. They are stuck in somebody's computer. And those words that one thinks and one writes, just as a joke, in a few seconds, well, they end up having quite a lot of weight. A weight that we can't measure when we write those sentences or phrases. And I think that we can give the word to the people who are younger than me, who uses social media much more than I do. And as regards to the construction of the character, I'm not too sure. Perhaps Rabat can tell us how he constructed his character in these two different, the two different spaces that appeared in the film. Well, along with Laurent, we talked a lot about the character to know which direction to take vis-a-vis the character, how to portray the character. Arthur Rimbaud. For me, I'm personally not a big fan of social media. I try to keep quite a distance from them with the internet and my life. I don't publish anything of my life because I form part of that generation, but I don't form part of the generation that was brought up with Twitter. There's a generation nowadays that are truly being brought up with social media. Where in the first generation, the young people who are 30 years old, those people were not born with it, but they were brought up with it. That's my generation, 30-year-olds. That's my generation. So, and we have a certain distance. We have an awareness of how dangerous they are. That is to say, the messages sent via the internet, videos sent via the social media, and I take that away from my person in order to portray that Arthur Rambo, who's a young man from a generation who's younger than me, and who, the truth be said, he was born and brought up with social media, and he lets himself get dragged along, and he thinks that the social media do not form part of life, and that those messages that one sends and are going to disappear. We can say, or we can allow ourselves to do many things because we do it via the internet, and it's not real life because the internet is not real life. So that's the direction that I wanted to give my character. Hi, good morning. I would like to know, and I've seen that the story said it's based freely upon the story of a name that I don't remember now, but I would like to know who that person is and whether, and what was the story, the background story, whether there were similar tweets already published, albeit you said those in the film are fictitious and so on and so forth. Well, there are several stories. The main story is the story of a young man called Mehdi Meklat, who wrote articles very well thought out about the banlieue, the outskirts neighborhoods where he lived. And then he was quite, in the media, he was hard hit because he had a day-to-day program in France Inter on the radio, on the national radio. And he wrote, along with a friend he had, and he wrote 2 books with this friend of his, and were well taken in by the critics. And the day in which he brought out his second book, what happened was that the tweets of the past re-emerged, as if despite everything, they wanted him to pay for his success, to tell me your success is not legitimate. In a couple of hours, his life, his literary life, was completely destroyed. And he had to explain, and he tried to explain it in a book that he published 2 or 3 years later. But I think he was already marked forever due to that story. And he himself says that those tweets don't reflect the way he thinks, nor his ideas. It was just a way of provoking, of drawing the attention to exist in the social media. There are so many messages that circulate, so many exchanges and conversations. To exist, you've got to be very funny, you've got to be very provocative, and the more provocative you are, the more followers you have. And he fell into that trap. His story allowed me to have a driving line for the character. There are many other cases and stories that are very similar in France, and I imagine also in Spain. I'm not too sure whether the co-script writers would like to contribute any information as regards to the adaptation of the real case, but also vis-a-vis all the elements upon the digital identity in the film, from the first green background and the person who's always continuously charging their mobile phones. How was the story and the fictitious tweets as well? How was that written in the script? Well, this responds to the question that a journalist asked before, the question of fiction and what's real and what's documentary. Not only does it go through the work of Laurent for quite a few years now, but in this film, and this is shown quite particularly at every level of the writing it and staging it. This background, the green background screen that you see, which is very beautiful at the beginning of the film because it's the meeting between writing and fiction. That green background, we can project whatever we want on that green background. It's the idea of trying to say that we're going to take away the false background to tell something that's real that wouldn't exist with that image in the background. And the writing of the script, all the work consisted in finding that in a specific case is more general. What I mean is how to demonstrate that documentary side of things that demonstrates fiction but calls a lot of people and it goes beyond borders. And it goes to a lot of people and, via fiction. And also, I would go back to the mask. The script is built, or constructed, shall we say, in a sort of like a night and a day, okay? There's two parts. The guide is, it's like two sheets. You have the figure of the double, Karim and Arthur Rambo, and then his girlfriend, who also has another boyfriend, and he's in Paris and also in the neighborhood, in the banlieue. We have deployed that reason, the mask and the double of the character. That's why we've addressed that duality as well. We're going back to fiction and what's real. The center and the periphery, the center of Paris and the center of the media, of everything, projection, a lot of lies. De Borg has addressed this, and the periphery where we enter into what's reality, or what you confronted on your day-to-day when you don't appear on TV or on no other screen. Hi, my question's for Rabat. Personally, you mentioned that you're not a great fan of social media, and I would like to know whether the moment in which the project of the Arthur Rambo character is presented to the shooting of the film, how would your idea evolve vis-a-vis freedom of expression nowadays and the consequences that freedom of expression may have now at present? I don't know whether my idea of freedom of expression has changed from the beginning to the end of the film. However, in the first part of your question, it is when I say I'm not a fan of social media. I come from a generation, as I said, that played football out in the street. And nowadays, the current generation doesn't do that. You don't see 6-year-old kids out in the street or 10-year-old kids playing in their neighborhood. No, they're there with their smartphones. We had a football, and we spent the whole day playing football. And there's a nuance here. There's an important nuance between one generation and another. My vision about freedom of expression between the beginning and the end of the shooting of the film, I'm not sure. It hasn't changed that much, the truth be said. I thought it was very interesting to address that issue. That what Laurent asked for me, I was very interested in participating due to that reason. It was a big challenge for me, for Laurent, and as well as for me. I'm very happy of having participated in the film. I would like to add something. Rabat, I've known him since he was very young, since he was a kid, because he also acted in Entre les Murs. He was one of the students between the walls. And to see him again in this shoot was something which was very exciting for me. And I thought about him when I wrote this film. I'd already seen him again because he's not done films of mine. He's also done many other films, and I've seen him as an actor in other films, and I knew that this boy had aged quite well, and he'd grown quite a lot. He'd grown up, and we worked together. We worked quite a lot with a lot of rehearsals on the character, talking a lot about the character. Is a complicated. He's complex because he's got to be very comfortable in that world in which he's entering into. He's got to feel himself to be comfortable. He looks to be very happy to turn up to that party, a mundane party in which he participates at the beginning of the film. But he's also, you've got to notice all of the work that this boy has carried out to feel okay. That he feels good, but not that good. He's not in the middle of his element, shall we say. And this is something that we try to convey, and Rabat have found that doses quite well. He measured it quite well. I'd like to go back to the issue of freedom of expression, and stop me if I'm mistaken, but I think the film doesn't talk so much about freedom of expression. But I think the film addresses other questions. Who's got the right to speak, and where do you have the right to speak? A film that talks more about the class struggle than freedom of expression, I believe. This is a question for Mr. Conte and the co-script writers. This film made me think what Jean Renoir said, everyone's got their reasons for what they do. And I would like to know, how do you address that idea when you write the script, but also when you make the film or shoot the film? Okay, thank you. Well, we thought about that quite a lot. And we even talked about that when we were writing the script. We were talking about Renoir. We talked about him. And it's a bit what I said before, earlier on. The issue here is to try and understand that character, because why is he doing what he does? From where does he come from? And what forces are driving him to do so? And then he sees the other characters around him that are within his field of sight and in his life. And those characters, how they, the editor, the publisher, for example, that big scene of the judgment, we called it a judgment. He's in the office deciding the future of this young man, and everyone plays their role in that scene. The publishing company, you've got the lawyer, you've got the publisher, the communication manager, and everyone each character says, this is my position, and they give their opinion. At the end of the film says, everyone's got their reasons, and we can enrich ourselves much more to learn about those reasons. Instead of condemning, we've got to understand more. That's the background of this film. When we started to get together and write, Marion also accompanied us, Marie-Ange accompanied us, the producer. She said that the film is a counterpoint to a social network, that that's to say, there's a relationship between features, film on Facebook, the social network, and this film, as if it were a bridge or a nexus between both films, that we could walk. There's a pathway between both films. That's what we were thinking about at the beginning when we started to write the script. So what? Yes, what do you think about what has just been said? Yes, when we talk about the film at the beginning and how it's going to be constructed and what shape it was or form it was going to take, what we wanted to say about social media, social network, that film impressed me quite a lot. But that was the beginning. It was the birth of something, I believe. And what that monster has turned into, and the film is the logical continuation of this. This is what that object of the social network, it's a monstrous, it's turned into something, a monster. It's something that we can't control. It's become a monster. What's funny about this is the social network, when they create Facebook and the first scene, he creates Facebook to seek revenge of his girlfriend in the film. And after RAMBO, the tweets at the end of the day, they turn around and they are a social revenge upon the character who tweeted them. That's the driving line and the plot, and the modest with David Fincher's, a modest nexus, shall we say, or link to David Fincher's film Social Network. Hola.
L'Allemagne, pardon. J'ai une question pour le titre.
As regards to the title Arthur Rambo, I think I proposed it. They said that they invented it, and I said, no, not at all. I think that it's a great idea. We don't know who who brought up the idea. What interested me is that there existed that duality in the title and in the pseudonym, because on the one hand, Arthur Rambo, the classic culture, Arthur Rambo, and Karim is accessing to the having access to the literary world, and on the other hand, Rambo, the character, the popular hero par excellence, who is violent. He's a fighter, and I wanted to join these two aspects to write about the character of Karim, who's between two worlds. On the one hand, he feels like writing literature, and he's also got a certain deep rage within him he's trying to stop. That pseudonym, that is a nom de plume, Arthur Rambo, it's a play on words that we want to say. It's quite funny, really, because that's the rule of play of when you use a pseudonym. I didn't want it to be the title. I didn't want that Arthur Rambo to be the title of the film. I thought it was quite enigmatic, but they convinced me to do so. All of my friends, they thought that was a very efficient, it was a good title to use, title for the film. Hi, good morning. In the film, an important part of the film is the fact that it's a man that's suffering this cancellation. How do you think that masculinity is related to what occurs? And if it had been a woman, would it have changed quite a lot or not? Well, I didn't ask myself that question at any time. Violence is more associated in general, I believe, with a man and not so much with a woman. And unconsciously, I didn't address the question on whether I could have placed a woman in his character instead. I'm not sure. I don't think so. Well, no, there's a story. An identical story in Medi Metclat, for example, is very similar to this. There's a girl who participated in The Voice, which is a program which is very successful. A singer, she won, and she made it to the final in The Voice. And she has also encountered these problems. She's had to suffer the same as Arthur Rambo in old messages that she'd posted on Twitter, were exhumed from the social media, and they were sent against her. It's not a question of it's not a gender issue. It's a question of social media and Twitter. That at a given moment, it's like the Far West, where everything is possible. You can say whatever you want, and you think nothing's going to be left. But in the internet memory, everything's there. The digital memory. And I think that Manel is a girl that the same thing. Manel, the same thing happened to her. Statistically speaking, all of the stories of these times that appear in the media that are talked about come from people from immigration or immigrants, people that come from of previous generations, like Samuel mentioned. Depending on who you are, you're going to bring about more public and powerful. The Twitter troll, for example, the excellent troll, and is now as Donald Trump. He's a violent man. He's the troll. A question for Laurent Cantet as regards to, you've called the culture of cancellation. The film shows how the publishing house doesn't even hesitate to finish with the promoting of the book, to stop it. All of the sound of the social media doesn't happen there, but it's translated into fact. That is, what do you think about this so-called culture of cancellation? Well, what most interests me more than the culture of cancellation is the way in how each person has their own reasons to reject what they've just discovered. The publishing company or house reacts that way in the film. And as regards to the issue of the culture of the cancel culture, we have to know what powers they have. That is to say, in canceling the publishing house to maintain its power, it annuls the life of a child who's comes from an immigrant. He's going to go to his neighborhood. No one's going to talk about them. It's not too expensive for the publishing house to cancel him. So therefore, it's not a culture. It's a weapon, and there's someone behind who uses that weapon in order to achieve a result. Not only for mere pleasure, they do obtain something. It's a question of power. A final question, please.
This is a film about many social issues, but it's also a movie about literature. Your last film was, The Workshop, was a movie about young people producing literature. And 4 years ago, you went to Brazil and you participated in a very important Brazilian social project called FLUP, Festa Literária das Periferias, teaching and discussing with young people from the favelas how to produce literature, how to produce culture. I would like to understand how those experiences, the experience of dealing with young people about literature in the workshop and dealing with the guys from FLUP, help you to understand this literary environment from the periferias. Thank you very much.
Well, I have the feeling that literature at the same time is a weapon, but it's a way of working upon itself, and to give yourself time to be able to write, albeit even if it's only 3 pages, quite personal. And this means that the way you look at yourself about your place in the world may be much more interesting for you. It's a medium. In the workshop, I consider the Atelier, which is a very optimistic film, because at the end the character doesn't want to go into the workshop or the writing workshop. He's always resisted that idea and rejected that idea. He enters into the process. He gains more because his life is going to change thanks to writing, because literature has that power. And I like to think about that very much. But we leave a lot of space for younger people to exist. In the literary world, we do. I don't believe we do. Albeit, I'm under the impression that left-wing and cultural people like the idea that now and again you see a character that emerges that could be very similar to Karim, and that emerges and may exist because this shows that our society is less divided and shut off in compartments. Perhaps there's a lot of hypocrisy in all of this, because as regards, I don't know how to say this, but when when the rules are broken or quite quickly, what happens quite quickly? That's the question. The author is sent back and it goes against him and he's sent back to where he comes from. There are different dimensions in that question. You've got the intimate side, art, literature, films, the intimate side. Your personality, could it feed and make someone evolve? Can they overcome their condition of where they live and get out of there? But the problem is he's not sure that society is subsequently going to allow that him to overcome that situation, and that creates a greater frustration. It's greater violence which is generated at the end of the day, and in some cases it creates revolutions. Yes, one more question. I completely agree with what's been said about the objectives and the main theme of the film. I have no doubts, but I think it's also very important what is said in Arthur Rambo, in his hashtag. You also think it's important because what the scene I like is the scene between both brothers, and when the younger brother says, "So you fooled us up until now, you've been fooling us," and that has an enormous background, the issue of violent relations vis-a-vis the injustice that they live through every day. And by the way, thank you very much for the film and congratulations. First of all, what was very important for me is for the tweets to appear on the screen, because it gives a greater violence than when you hear them or when you read them on a mobile phone. That violence has to exist. It has to be shown so that the audience can, between an empathy for the character who we see and that the debate with a great incomprehension or incomprehension of what's going on and not understand. And then there's also a rejection of the character because what he's written is unbearable and it's very difficult to read. What also interests me is that readdressing the issue, because he's always asking these questions. There's work that the character asks himself to understand what's happening to him. He's asking himself questions, he's re-asking himself questions, and that brings about the debate and the discussion with his brother, that brings about the responsibility of having to write, or even if it's something just to be funny or to send a messenger of 100 and something characters for his friends, that has some transcendence. It has a weight behind it. It makes sense. And that literal sense, when they direct themselves to a multitude of people, that literal sense or meaning can be captured as something real. And quite sincerely, Karim, when he writes those messages, horrible messages, he does it without believing it too much. He just does it and he says, my book reflects the way I think, and the tweets don't. And that was just to be funny. And I think that he really believes this, but those phrases are still there. Why? Because it's black on white in a book. Why? Because it's as if it's engraved on marble. And that re-questioning and the rage of his younger brother is like the rage Karim has, because he's trying to dominate the situation, trying to control the situation. The younger brother puts him before that reality. That's what we said before about the emancipation of writing. Arthur emancipates himself with writing because he writes a book. He makes it to the media. He emancipates himself. The second degree is also important for him because he had success internally. He leaves it. He gets to the second level, but when he finds his brother, it's like a double of himself. There's always a double, like Fanny said. But before his brother, he's a double. And the brother didn't have access to literature or to that workshop. He doesn't access the second level. The brother doesn't know that those tweets were false. And that's where the difference between what's false and what's true is clear. Why the people that come from the same place sometimes have got the right to access the second level and the others don't. Okay, let's finish here. A big round of applause, please, for the cast and crew and